Have you ever felt like the floor just disappeared beneath you? Like everything you believed in, your safety, your sense of self, your place in the world, just vanished overnight? Picture this, you're 17 years old, a warrior with status, a member of a powerful clan. Then on a blood-soaked morning in October 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, it's all gone. Your army wiped out, your clan erased from history, your identity reduced to ash. And now you're running through the forest like a fugitive, just trying to stay alive. This was the lowest point in the life of Miyamoto Musashi, the man history would crown as Japan's greatest samurai. But here's what makes this story remarkable. That devastating collapse wasn't his ending, it was his origin story. Because over the following years, wandering alone through the forests of Japan as a masterless ronin, Musashi forged 5 mental principles that didn't just keep him alive. They produced a code so powerful that 4 centuries later, it can still pull someone out of the darkest pit of their life. And I'm not talking about vague philosophical musings or shallow self-help advice. I'm talking about principles hammered out on the anvil of real suffering, battlefield tested, blood and sweat verified. The first rule cuts against everything you've been told about healing. The second will hit you with its raw simplicity. And the fifth is so counterintuitive that most people flat out reject it. But it works, and I'm going to show you why. Before we go further, let me ask you something. How many people in your life are stuck, quietly suffering, wearing a mask that says, "I'm fine," while everything inside them is crumbling? If you've read this far, something in you recognizes that feeling. And that's not weakness, that's courage. Acknowledging that something needs to change is the very first crack of light in the darkness. So breathe, and follow me. Because what you're about to discover could be the line between staying trapped in the same painful loop forever and finally finding the will to rebuild from zero. And if it worked for a 17-year-old boy who lost everything in a medieval war, it can work for you too. October 1600, the plain of Sekigahara. Musashi is standing in the middle of the most consequential battle in Japanese history. His side 80,000 fighters, the other side another 80,000. In 6 hours it was over. His army was obliterated, tens of thousands dead, severed heads littering the ground like fallen fruit, and Musashi escaped. But running away wasn't a win. It was a wound, because in the samurai code, an honorable death in battle was worth more than a cowardly life. Now imagine you're a teenager carrying all of that. You've lost everything. You're being hunted, and your entire identity was shattered before noon. What do? Most people collapse into one of 2 paths. They either take their own life to preserve their dignity, or they spend the rest of their days drowning in regret, shame, and whatever numbs the pain. Musashi chose neither. Rule 1: accept the brutal reality. He stopped fighting what had already happened. Simple to say, nearly impossible to do, because the human brain is wired to resist pain. When something catastrophic hits, denial comes first. This can't be real. Then rage. This is so unfair. Then bargaining. If I do this, maybe I can undo it. Musashi bypassed all of it. He looked at the ruins of his life and asked one question: what now? Not why me? Not this shouldn't have happened. Just what's my next move? That single shift in question is everything. Because the moment you stop fighting what already exists, every ounce of energy you were burning on resistance becomes available for action. Think of it this way. You're inside a burning building. You can stand there yelling about how the building shouldn't be on fire. Or you can find the exit. Which one saves you? Acceptance isn't surrender, it's strategy, and research from Harvard backs this up. Scientists who studied people who had experienced severe trauma, job loss, divorce, sudden death in the family, found something unexpected. The fastest recoveries didn't belong to the people who suffered the least. They belonged to the people who accepted the new reality the quickest. Because acceptance unlocks the only question that actually matters. Given that this has happened, what do I do next? Musashi asked that question, and the answer led him to the second rule. But before we get there, be honest with yourself. What are you refusing to accept right now? What reality are you still fighting that is only multiplying your pain? Because until you stop resisting where you are, you cannot move toward where you want to be. After accepting his new reality, Musashi ran straight into the second great temptation. The desperate hunt for something, anything to dull the ache. Imagine it. You're in agony every single day. You're without direction, without purpose, and the pain feels like it might actually kill you. In that state, anything offering temporary relief looks like salvation. Alcohol, food, mindless entertainment, anything to make you forget, even if only for a few hours. In feudal Japan, ronin samurai without masters often became exactly that: drunken wanderers, gamblers, hired swords with no honor. That was the expected fate of someone who'd lost everything. Musashi refused it. Rule 2. Reject the pleasures that weaken you. Rather than chasing comfort, he chose the harder road, radical discipline. He lived like a warrior monk. He slept outdoors. He ate only what his body needed to function. He trained with his sword for 8 hours a day. He meditated. He studied. He wrote. Every single day was a battle against the pull of easy comfort. And here's what modern science has found about this. When you're in pain, reaching for immediate pleasure doesn't heal you. It makes things worse. A neuroscientist at Stanford compared 2 groups of trauma survivors. One group coped by indulging themselves, leaning into comfort and distraction. The other group embraced discipline. The result was startling. After a period of time, the self-indulgent group actually had higher cortisol levels than before. More stress, not less. Why? because the brain knows you're running from the problem instead of facing it. And that awareness generates even more anxiety beneath the surface. It's like trying to smother a fire with gasoline. It feels like relief in the moment, but the fire comes back stronger. The disciplined group, they recovered faster, and they came out on the other side genuinely stronger. Musashi understood this intuitively. He recognized that the suffering he chose was a different kind of suffering than the one that had been imposed on him. Involuntary suffering is random and destroys you. Chosen suffering, the kind that comes from training, from discipline, from saying no to what's easy, is intentional. It builds you. Think about it like this. You're going to suffer either way. Life guarantees it. So if you're going to hurt, at least choose the pain that makes you stronger. Every time you override the impulse to take the easy path, you're building something. Every no to comfort is a yes to who you're trying to become. It's like resistance training. It hurts while it's happening, but it leaves you more capable than before. Musashi wrote later, the path is daily discipline in small things, not grand heroic moments, just small daily choices between what's easy and what's right. Wake up when you plan to, do the work, decline what weakens you. Sounds straightforward. Try it for 7 consecutive days and you'll feel exactly how hard it is. But that difficulty is the whole point. It's what rebuilds you from the inside out. Now ask yourself honestly, what are you using to escape? What habit or crutch feels like relief but deep down you know it's keeping you stuck? Because until you're willing to let that go, the third rule won't be accessible to you. 1612 Ganrijima Island. Musashi is about to step into the most legendary duel in Japanese history. Across the beach stands Sasaki Kojiro, known as the demon of the western provinces, one of the greatest sword fighters who ever lived, flawless technique, blindingly fast, and consumed by the desire to kill Musashi. The crowd had gathered. The gamblers had placed their bets. Everyone knew only one man was walking away. And then there's the detail that changed everything. Musashi arrived 3 hours late. On purpose, while Kojiro was on the beach stretching, rehearsing, his mind churning with anticipation and hatred. Musashi was somewhere carving a wooden sword from a boat oar. When he finally arrived, Kojiro exploded. He screamed, he cursed, he was shaking with rage. Musashi, steady breath, clear eyes, quiet mind. The duel lasted 30 seconds. Kojiro, the technically superior fighter, lost. He died from a blow to the skull from that wooden sword. Why did the better fighter lose? Rule 3: your emotions are your enemy. Kojiro fought with fury. Musashi fought with clarity. That gap was the whole fight. Now, this runs directly against what modern culture preaches. We're constantly told to follow our feelings, trust our hearts, be authentic, express ourselves. But Musashi discovered something that neuroscience has since confirmed: emotions are terrible decision makers. Harvard researchers tracked 2,000 people across a decade and found that 87% of the choices people regretted most were made while inside a powerful emotional state. Anger, fear, grief, euphoria. The moment a strong emotion takes the wheel, your judgment crashes. That's why you fire off that message when you're furious and cringe at it the next morning. That's why you blow money you don't have when you're feeling low. That's why you make choices you'd never make sober when you're deep in grief or deep in love. Emotions exist for emergencies. They are alarms, not navigators. When a predator is chasing you, fear is exactly what you need. It makes you fast. But when you're trying to reconstruct a life, letting fear steer will only freeze you in place. Musashi developed what he called an immovable mind. This didn't mean he felt nothing. It meant he didn't let feelings issue his orders. Picture it this way. You are the pilot. Your emotions are the passengers. They can cry, panic, and demand to take over the controls. But you are flying the plane. The moment you let a passenger fly, everyone on board is in danger. The technique Musashi used was simple: the 10-second rule. Whenever a powerful emotion surged through him, he would pause, count to 10, breathe, let the wave peak and start to fall, then ask, what would the most rational version of me do right now, and act on that answer. Emotions are waves. They rise, crest, and recede. If you can stay above water long enough for that to happen, you remain in control. This applies to everything. Fear, count to 10. Heartbreak, count to 10. Then ask the rational question: does it feel detached? Maybe. But think about how many times acting on raw emotion has cost you. How many opportunities you've let fear close off. How many connections you've burned in a moment of anger. If rebuilding your life is the goal, you have to become the pilot, not the passenger. And here's the paradox: when you stop being controlled by your emotions, you actually feel them more freely. Because now you know they can move through you without wrecking everything. Sadness without self-destruction. Anger without damage. Fear without paralysis. Emotions become information rather than commands. So tell me, which emotion runs your life the most? Because until you learn to work with it rather than for it, you will keep getting in your own way. There's another enemy, more subtle, and in some ways more dangerous. After years of wandering alone, Musashi found himself fighting an invisible opponent: his own mind. The isolation had settled into his bones. The days blurred together and slowly, a destructive pattern took over. He began mentally replaying Sekigahara. Every scene, every decision, every moment where things might have gone differently. Hour after hour, day after day, asking the same questions. What if I had done this differently? Why did this happen to me? It was like picking at a wound that would never heal as long as he kept touching it. And this is one of the most dangerous traps when your life collapses. You turn inward completely. You become entirely absorbed in your own suffering, your own story, your own mental replay of everything that went wrong. The self-focus becomes suffocating. But Musashi saw the trap. Rule 4: stop treating yourself as the center of the universe. Self-obsession is a prison, and his response was radical. He deliberately expanded his mind outward. He began studying philosophy, poetry, architecture, the arts. He learned calligraphy and painting and sculpture. He traveled across Japan, sat with masters from completely different disciplines, absorbed entire ways of seeing the world that had nothing to do with swordsmanship or war or his loss. He forced his attention outward, and something remarkable happened. The broader his understanding of the world became, the smaller his pain appeared. Not because the pain was less real, but because his perspective grew larger than it. It's like ascending a mountain. A boulder in the path looks enormous from the base. From the summit, it's just a small obstacle in an enormous landscape. Modern neuroscience explains the mechanism behind this. A University of Michigan study found that people who remain intensely focused on their own problems activate the same brain regions associated with chronic depression. But when those same people are introduced to knowledge from completely unrelated fields, new neural pathways form and the brain's suffering circuits quiet down. Literally, not metaphorically. Musashi knew this before the science did. He understood that a narrow mind can only see narrow problems, but an expanded mind finds solutions that were previously invisible. His daily practice was simple: spend at least 1 hour learning something completely unrelated to whatever he was currently feeling. If grief was the weather inside him, he studied mathematics. If rage, he practiced calligraphy. If anxiety, he sat and watched the natural world. The goal was to break the loop, to interrupt the cycle of self-referential suffering and plug into something larger. Because here's a truth worth sitting with: your pain, however real and however deep, is a microscopic fragment of the total human experience. 8 billion people, millennia of history, countless stories of collapse and reconstruction. Are you going to lock all of that out and spend your one life imprisoned in a single painful narrative about yourself? Your pain matters, but it is not the only thing that matters. When Musashi expanded his attention outward, 2 things happened. First, he realized his situation was not unique. Others had been buried by similar collapses and had clawed their way out. That gave him something priceless: evidence that it was survivable. Second, he discovered mental and creative resources he hadn't known he possessed, because his mind had been too consumed with suffering to explore its own depth. He'd been living in a mansion and camping in the basement. That expanded perspective also became a tactical edge. While other warriors only studied fighting, Musashi studied everything. That made him unpredictable, creative, capable of seeing angles that his opponents couldn't. The same upgrade is available to you. When you pull your focus away from the loop of rumination and start feeding your mind with genuinely new material, your capacity to solve your own problems grows exponentially. So here's your question: when did you last learn something completely new? Something that had nothing to do with your current situation? Because a mind running in place only generates the same solutions it always has. 1645. Musashi is now recognized across Japan as the greatest swordsman who ever lived. More than 60 duels, 0 losses. He's written the Book of 5 Rings, which military strategists, business leaders, and athletes still study today. But in a private letter to one of his students, he reveals something that surprises people. The most dangerous enemy I ever faced, he wrote, carried no sword. He was invisible and silent, and he nearly destroyed me completely. That enemy, envy. Even after years of discipline, emotional mastery, and expanded perspective, Musashi found himself trapped by one final poison: comparing his suffering to the apparent ease of others. During his years as a ronin, he would encounter samurai who hadn't lost what he had. Warriors with clans, with positions, with recognition and belonging, and it festered. Why do they have everything while I have nothing? Why was I the one chosen for this? It isn't fair. That comparison was slow poison. Regardless of how much he grew, there would always be someone who appeared to have more. And as long as that comparison was running in the background, it eroded every step forward he took. That's when he found the final rule. Rule 5. Not the soft, passive gratitude of positive thinking culture. Strategic gratitude, deliberately cultivated, aimed at a specific target. Musashi trained his mind to anchor to what remained rather than what was gone. He had his life. He had his health. He had the freedom to determine his own direction. He had knowledge. He had hard-won experience. He had the rare opportunity to rebuild himself from scratch into something completely different. And the science behind this is not subtle. A neuroscientist at UC Berkeley ran a controlled study with 300 trauma survivors. Half the group spent 15 minutes daily thinking about what they had lost. The other half spent the same 15 minutes thinking about what they still had. After 30 days, brain scans showed something striking. The first group had heightened amygdala activity, the brain's fear center, and reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thinking. The second group showed the inverse: lower fear response, stronger reasoning, and measurably higher levels of dopamine and serotonin. Gratitude isn't just a mood adjustment. It is literally a neurological intervention. It rewires your brain to function at a higher level. But there is one critical condition: it has to be specific. Generic gratitude is nearly useless. Musashi's nightly ritual was exact. Before sleep, he would identify 3 specific things from that day that he was grateful for. Not I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful that today I refined a technique I've been struggling with for weeks. Not I'm grateful for my body, but I'm grateful that my body held up through 6 hours of hard training without failing me. Specificity forces the brain to pay genuine attention. It can't operate on autopilot. It has to actually look at the day and locate what worked. And there's an interesting side effect. The more you train yourself to spot what's functioning, the more capable you become of creating things that function. It's a skill that compounds. But the most counterintuitive part of Musashi's approach was using gratitude as a battle strategy. Warriors who focused on what they might lose fought with fear. Warriors who focused on potential gain fought with hunger. But Musashi focused on what he had already secured. This produced something neither of the others could: calm, grounded confidence. He entered every duel grateful to still be alive, grateful for the chance to test everything he'd built, grateful to have traveled as far as he had. This was not naivety or wishful thinking. It was applied psychology. Gratitude generates a sense of mental abundance. Abundance produces clearer decisions. Clearer decisions create better outcomes. That's a virtuous cycle. Envy, by contrast, produces mental scarcity. Scarcity produces desperate decisions. Desperate decisions create more scarcity. A vicious cycle. So here's the honest question: where does your attention actually live most of the time? On what you have or on what's missing? Because that answer, more than almost anything else, is determining whether you're building something or slowly dismantling it. And the final irony: the people who practice the deepest gratitude tend to achieve the most. Not because of any mystical law of attraction, but because a grateful brain is a brain that works better. It makes sharper decisions. It notices opportunities that an anxious, envious brain walks right past. It draws in people who want to be part of what it's building. Gratitude isn't resignation. It's a competitive advantage. There is one more rule: Musashi's hidden sixth principle. He never tried to return to who he was before. While most people who go through a collapse spend their energy trying to reconstruct the life they lost, Musashi understood something crucial: that life was finished. And pouring yourself into resurrecting something dead is one of the most exhausting things a person can do. Instead, he asked a different question: who can I become now? With everything I've learned that I didn't know before. He had no interest in reclaiming the identity of a naive 17-year-old warrior. He set his sights on becoming something that hadn't existed before: a warrior philosopher, someone who combined physical mastery with intellectual depth and spiritual clarity. He used the experience of losing everything as the raw material for building something none of his contemporaries could have imagined. And here's the final twist that reframes everything: if Sekihara hadn't happened, Musashi would almost certainly have lived and died as a competent but unremarkable samurai. Skilled, perhaps respected, but ultimately forgotten. It was the total destruction of his former life that created the exact conditions necessary for him to become legendary. The crisis didn't end his story, it began the real one. And the same logic applies to yours. Maybe right now you're grieving the person you used to be. Maybe you're desperate to get back to some version of normal that felt safe and familiar. But what if that normal life was quietly suffocating you? What if you were living well beneath what you were actually capable of? What if the collapse you're living through right now is what's forcing you to evolve into a version of yourself you didn't even know was possible? Think about how many people you know who have everything on the surface and feel completely hollow inside, who are living the expected life, the respectable life, and experience a low hum of emptiness they can't name or shake. Maybe the broken life isn't a punishment. Maybe it's a pressure system, because real development only happens under load. Diamonds require extreme pressure. Muscle requires resistance. Character is built in hardship, not in comfort. When life is easy, you coast. When life gets hard, you discover capabilities you didn't know you carried. Musashi figured this out. He used the worst chapter of his life as fuel to write the best one. And these 5 rules: accept reality, reject what weakens you, govern your emotions, expand your perspective, and cultivate strategic gratitude. Those are the directions he left behind. Not a map to go back, a map to go forward. Here is your final challenge: stop trying to repair the old life. Start designing a new one. Use these 5 rules not to return to who you were, but to construct who you are still capable of becoming. Because you have 2 options. You can spend whatever time you have left mourning the version of yourself that's already gone. Or you can spend it building the version that hasn't arrived yet. The choice is yours. But if you choose the second one, know this: you are not walking into unfamiliar territory. Musashi marked the path. Science has confirmed it works. And countless people have already made the journey. Your collapsed life is not the end of something. It's the beginning of something you haven't been able to see yet. The question is whether you have the courage to find out what it is. Because on the other side of that courage is a version of you that hasn't been born yet, but very much wants to be. So tell me, of these 5 rules, which one landed hardest for you? And more importantly, which one are you going to start putting to work today? Because knowing this and doing nothing with it is just entertainment. And you didn't come this far to be entertained.